A billionaire sheikh humiliates 40 Arabic experts with an impossible question. Only a 7-year-old maid's daughter answers correctly, shocking everyone. Like and comment if you believe knowledge has no boundaries. Before we get into it, let's make this moment global. Leave a comment in your own language. The crystalline chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble floor of Sheikh Khalid Al Mansour's grand conference hall as 40 of the world's most distinguished Arabic scholars shifted uncomfortably in their velvet seats. At 35, Khalid had inherited not just billions, but a legacy spanning 12 centuries, a lineage of sultans, poets, and keepers of linguistic treasures that most academics only dreamed of glimpsing. His sharp jawline and penetrating dark eyes surveyed the room with the confidence of a man who had never known defeat. His white thobe immaculate, his black bisht flowing like liquid night across his broad shoulders. "Gentlemen, ladies," his voice resonated through the hall, rich with authority and barely concealed amusement. "You've traveled from Oxford, Cambridge, Al-Azhar, and the Sorbonne. Your credentials are impeccable. Your publications impressive. But today, I will ask you a question that will expose the difference between academic arrogance and true knowledge." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. In the manuscript of Al-Kitab al-Muqaddas al-Qadim, written in 847 AD, there exists a single word, al-Muraqaba, used in a context that defies all modern interpretations. What does it mean in that specific historical and spiritual context? The scholars exchanged nervous glances, some frantically typing on tablets, others whispering to colleagues. Dr. Heinrich Müller from Berlin adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, his face reddening. Professor Yasmin al-Rashid from Cairo, renowned for her work on classical Arabic poetry, bit her lower lip in frustration. The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. 5, 10, 15. Not a single hand rose. In the back corner of the hall, hidden behind a marble column, 7-year-old Isabella Santos clutched her mother's cleaning supplies, her wide brown eyes absorbing every word. Her small frame barely reached her mother's waist, and her worn school uniform, a faded blue dress with patches sewn lovingly by Mariana's careful hands, contrasted sharply with the opulence surrounding her. Isabella's Portuguese-Brazilian heritage showed in her caramel skin, dark curly hair pulled into 2 uneven pigtails, and expressive eyes that seemed far too knowing for a child who should have been playing with dolls. "Mama," she whispered in Portuguese, tugging at Mariana's worn apron. "Why don't they know?" The word means the watchfulness of the soul before God during the night of spiritual awakening. It's on page 347 of the Green Book in the Third Library. Mariana Santos, a 32-year-old Brazilian immigrant who cleaned the palace for a modest salary, felt her heart stop. "Bella, minha filha, no," she hissed, panic flooding her dark eyes. "Those books are forbidden. If the Sheikh discovers you've been reading his private collection..." Her voice cracked with terror. She had worked for 3 years in this palace, sending most of her earnings back to her elderly mother in São Paulo, living in constant fear of dismissal, of losing the visa that kept her and Isabella safe, fed, housed. But Isabella's small hand was already slipping from her mother's grasp. The child's feet moved with a will of their own, carrying her through the shadows, past the columns, into the blinding light of the conference hall. Mariana's desperate whisper, "Bella, no!" faded behind her. Sheikh Khalid had just begun to speak again, his tone dripping with condescension. "It appears that even the world's finest scholars cannot—" "Excuse me, sir." The small voice cut through his monologue like a silver bell through thunder. The room fell into absolute silence. 40 distinguished academics turned as one, their expressions ranging from shock to offense. The Sheikh's eyes narrowed dangerously as they located the source, a tiny girl in a threadbare school uniform, her hands clasped nervously in front of her, standing in a spotlight as if on trial. "Who allowed a child into this chamber?" His voice could have frozen fire. Security guards moved forward immediately, but Khalid raised one hand, halting them. Something in the child's posture intrigued him. The way she trembled but didn't run, the intelligence burning in her young eyes despite her obvious terror. I know the answer, sir," Isabella said in careful English, her Portuguese accent thick, but her pronunciation remarkably clear for a 7-year-old. "The word al-Muraqaba in that manuscript means the watchfulness of the soul before God during the night of spiritual awakening. It refers to a Sufi practice where the seeker maintains consciousness of the divine presence during the darkest moment before dawn, when the veil between worlds grows thin. The author uses it exactly 3 times in the text, always in relation to the Prophet's night journey, and distinguishes it from Muraqabat al-Qalb, which is mere observation of the heart. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Muller's tablet slipped from his fingers and clattered on the floor. Professor al-Rashid's mouth fell open, her 20 years of academic prestige crumbling in an instant. The Sheikh's expression transformed from irritation to absolute astonishment. No one, absolutely no one outside his immediate family and perhaps 2 elderly scholars in Mecca should know this. How? His voice was barely a whisper now, all arrogance evaporated. "How do you know this?" Isabella's lower lip trembled. Behind her, Mariana had emerged from the shadows, tears streaming down her face, already murmuring prayers in Portuguese, already preparing for the worst. The child's voice was small, ashamed, terrified. "I read it in your library, sir. The 3rd library, the one with green carpets. When Mama cleans your offices, I hide there. I'm sorry, I know I shouldn't have, but the books, they call to me. I can't help it." Sheikh Khalid rose from his throne-like chair, his 6-foot frame towering, his face unreadable as he descended the steps toward the child. Every person in the room held their breath. Mariana fell to her knees. "Please, Sheikh Khalid, forgive her. She's just a child. Punish me, dismiss me, send us away, but please don't hurt my daughter." But Khalid wasn't looking at Mariana. His eyes were fixed on Isabella, and in them burned something that looked almost like recognition. "You've been reading the manuscripts in the Al-Khizana al-Kamisa, the locked library?" "It's not locked anymore," Isabella whispered. "The door opens if you press the carved rose on the frame. I discovered it by accident 4 months ago." A ripple of disbelief swept through the scholars. The 5th treasury, locked for 30 years, containing texts so rare that kings had waged wars to possess them, and a 7-year-old had simply walked in. "And you can read classical Arabic at 7? His tone was gentler now, probing, fascinated. "I taught myself from the books, sir. I started with the children's poetry collection, the one with gold edges, and then moved to the harder ones. I don't understand everything, but the language, it's beautiful, like music made of words." Her voice grew stronger, forgetting her fear for a moment as passion overtook terror. "The way the letters connect, the way single words contain entire universes of meaning. Portuguese is my first language, but Arabic feels like coming home to a place I've never been." Sheikh Khalid knelt before her, bringing himself to her eye level, studying her face with an intensity that made the child squirm. "What's your name?" "Isabella Santos, sir, but Mama calls me Bella." "Bella." He repeated the name softly, as if tasting it. "Do you know what you've just done? You've answered a question that has confounded scholars for decades. A question I myself spent 5 years researching. A question that—" He paused, his jaw tightening. "A question my father asked me when I was exactly your age, and I failed to answer." The revelation hung in the air like suspended lightning. The great Sheikh Khalid al-Mansur, heir to an empire, master of 6 languages, educated at Harvard and Oxford, had once stood before his own father and failed the very test this poor Brazilian child had just passed. He stood abruptly, addressing the stunned assembly. "This conference is concluded. You may leave." When no one moved, his voice cracked like a whip. "Now!" The scholars scrambled to their feet, gathering their belongings in humiliated haste, shooting bewildered glances at the small girl who had reduced their expertise to worthlessness. Within minutes, the grand hall emptied, leaving only Sheikh Khalid, his head of security, Hassan, Isabella and Mariana, who remained on her knees, trembling. "Mrs. Santos, please stand." Khalid's voice was firm but no longer cold. "Your daughter has not committed a crime. She has revealed something extraordinary, something impossible." He turned back to Isabella. "Tell me, what else have you read?" Isabella's confidence flickered to life like a candle in darkness. "The poetry of Al-Mutanabi, the philosophical treatises of Al-Ghazali, the medical texts of Ibn Sina, though I don't understand most of the medicine part, and my favorite, the love letters between Sultan Mehmed and his wife Roxolana, translated into Arabic from Ottoman Turkish. Those made me cry." Khalid's hand went to his chest as if struck. "Those letters are not catalogued. How did you find them?" "They were hidden in a blue silk box behind the astronomy section. The box has a moon carved on it." For the first time since anyone could remember, Sheikh Khalid al-Mansur smiled. Not the practiced political smile he showed investors and diplomats, but a genuine expression of wonder. "My grandmother hid those there 60 years ago. I've searched for them my entire life." He began pacing, his mind visibly racing through possibilities, implications, impossibilities. A 7-year-old who taught herself classical Arabic from medieval manuscripts. A child with photographic memory and linguistic intuition that defies explanation. A girl who can access locked rooms that have defeated expert locksmiths. He stopped, turning to face Mariana. "Your daughter is not ordinary, Mrs. Santos. Surely you've realized this." Mariana's tears continued flowing, but her voice was steady with a mother's fierce love. She memorized the Bible in Portuguese when she was 4. She taught herself English from television. She corrects adults' grammar without meaning to. "Yes, sir, I know my Bella is special, but we are poor. I'm just a cleaning woman. We have no one, nothing. All I can give her is love and hope that somehow, someday, her gifts will matter." "They matter today," Khalid said quietly. "They matter right now." He snapped his fingers, and Hassan immediately stepped forward, phone ready. "Hassan, contact the Ministry of Education. I want Isabella enrolled in the Royal Academy immediately. Full scholarship, private tutors in Arabic, Portuguese, and English. Contact my attorney. I want a new employment contract drawn up for Mrs. Santos. She'll be my head of household staff, with salary commensurate to that position, plus housing in the East Wing family apartments." "Sir!" Mariana gasped. "I don't understand." "Your daughter possesses a gift that appears once in a generation, perhaps less. To waste it would be criminal, but more than that." He knelt again before Isabella, his expression softening into something almost vulnerable. "When I was 7, my father brought me to that same library and gave me the same test. I spent hours searching, and I failed. He told me I was unworthy of our family's legacy. That disappointment shaped my entire life, drove me to succeed, yes, but also convinced me I would never be enough." His voice dropped to a whisper. "You succeeded where I failed, little one. And perhaps, in teaching you, I can finally forgive that 7-year-old boy who couldn't answer his father's question." Isabella, with the emotional wisdom children sometimes possess, reached out and placed her small hand on the Sheikh's cheek. "Your father was wrong. You're more than enough. The books say that true knowledge isn't about having all the answers. It's about knowing how to find them and sharing them with others. You're doing that now." In that moment, in the vast, empty conference hall where 40 experts had been humiliated and a child had triumphed, 3 lives changed irrevocably. But none of them yet understood that this was merely the first chapter of a story that would challenge everything they believed about destiny, identity, and the secrets hidden in ancient texts. The question no one had asked yet, the question that would shake the foundations of the Al-Mansur dynasty, was this: how did a Brazilian child possess instincts for Arabic that seemed almost inherited? What connection could possibly exist between a cleaning woman's daughter and the linguistic legacy of a royal lineage? And what would be revealed when someone finally examined not just what Isabella had learned, but why those forbidden books had called to her soul like a siren song to a sailor lost at sea? The Al-Mansur family estate occupied 15 acres in the heart of the Emirates, but it was the East Wing, traditionally reserved for blood relatives, that now housed Mariana and Isabella Santos. The apartment assigned to them was larger than any home Mariana had ever dreamed of owning. 3 bedrooms with en-suite bathrooms, a living area with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking gardens where peacocks roamed freely, and a kitchen that made Mariana weep because it contained appliances she'd only seen in magazines. But luxury meant nothing compared to the terror that kept her awake at night. "This isn't real, Bella," she whispered to her daughter on their 3rd morning in paradise, braiding Isabella's wild curls before school. "Men like Sheikh Khalid don't help people like us. There must be something he wants, some price we'll have to pay." Isabella, dressed in the crisp uniform of the Royal Academy, navy blazer with gold embroidery, pleated skirt, pristine white blouse, turned to face her mother, her 7-year-old features serious beyond her years. "Mama, he wants to heal something broken inside himself. I felt it when he talked about his father. He sees me as a chance to rewrite his own story. That's exactly what worries me, Minafila." Mariana tied off the 2nd braid with trembling fingers. "What happens when he realizes you're not the answer to his past? What happens when you stop being useful or interesting? We'll lose everything again." Indeed, but Isabella's first day at the Royal Academy silenced Mariana's fears temporarily with sheer, overwhelming terror of a different kind. The school sat on a private island, accessible only by a glass bridge that seemed to float above turquoise water. Children arrived in limousines and helicopters, their parents oil magnates and tech billionaires, and actual royalty. And here was Isabella Santos, daughter of a cleaning woman, walking through gold-plated doors into a marble atrium where a fountain sculpted from a single piece of jade sang with falling water. The other children stared. Of course they stared. Her skin was too dark, her accent too thick, her background too poor. During morning assembly, when the headmistress announced her arrival as the special protégée of Sheikh Khalid al-Mansur, the whispers started immediately. Why would Uncle Khalid sponsor a maid's daughter? Base, Amira al-Nahyan, an 8-year-old princess with perfect posture and a voice like cut glass, spoke just loud enough for Isabella to hear. "My father says charity cases lower the school's standards." Layla Al-Thani, daughter of a Qatari diplomat, giggled behind her hand. "I heard she can barely read. They had to give her special placement." The lies spread like wildfire through recess, transforming with each retelling. By lunch, some students claimed Isabella was illiterate. Others said she'd blackmailed the sheikh somehow. A particularly vicious rumor suggested Mariana had seduced him. 7-year-old Isabella sat alone in the opulent cafeteria, her gourmet meal untouched, fighting tears that threatened to spill and prove all her tormentors right. But it was in Arabic language class that everything changed. Professor Rashid al-Kuwari, a severe man in his 60s with a white beard and penetrating grey eyes, was a legend in linguistic circles, so prestigious that even children of royalty approached his class with trepidation. He had a reputation for destroying confidence with a single cutting remark, for accepting nothing less than perfection, for reducing students to tears with his exacting standards. "We begin today with classical poetry," he announced, writing elegant script on the board. Al-Mutanabi, considered by many the greatest Arab poet. Who can read this verse and provide proper pronunciation with correct classical inflection? The students, usually eager to demonstrate their abilities, suddenly found their desks fascinating. Amira, who'd been bragging about her Arabic tutors all morning, shrank in her seat. Classical Arabic wasn't the modern dialect they spoke at home. It was a linguistic puzzle that took years to master. "No volunteers?" Professor Al-Kuwari's eyebrow arched dangerously. "How disappointing. You, new girl." His finger pointed directly at Isabella like an accusation. "Read the verse. Let's see what Sheikh Khalid's special protégé can actually do." The cruelty in his tone was clear. He expected her to fail, to be exposed as a fraud, to provide entertainment for his more legitimate students. Isabella felt every eye in the classroom boring into her, heard Amira's soft snicker, saw Layla's smirk. Her hands shook as she stood, her legs barely supporting her small frame. But then something remarkable happened. Isabella looked at the words on the board, and they transformed. She didn't see letters. She saw music. She didn't see script. She saw the soul of a long-dead poet reaching across centuries to speak directly to her heart. When she opened her mouth, the Arabic that emerged was flawless, not just correct, but alive with emotion, flowing with the rhythmic beauty that had made Al-Mutanabi immortal. "I am known by the blind through my horse, and in the night by my sword, and by my spear, and by my paper, and my pen." The words resonated through the classroom, each syllable perfectly weighted, each pause precisely placed. Isabella's 7-year-old voice carried nuances that native speakers twice her age struggled to achieve. She continued through the entire complex verse, navigating linguistic traps that would have destroyed university students, her pronunciation so pure it could have come from 9th century Baghdad. The silence, when she finished, was absolute. Professor Al-Kuwari's face had gone pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. His hand trembled as he set down his marker. "Repeat the third line," he commanded, his voice hoarse. Isabella did, without hesitation, without error. "Now translate it to English and explain the triple meaning in the poet's use of al-ta'ir." Isabella took a breath. In literal translation, al-ta'ir means the bird, referring to the falcon commonly used in poetry as a symbol of nobility and freedom. But Al-Mutanabi employs a layered technique here. The word simultaneously invokes al-ta'ir, meaning the vengeful one, and phonetically echoes al-tahir, meaning the pure. And so in that single word, he's communicating that the falcon represents the contradiction of aristocracy, noble and free, yet capable of vengeful violence, yet still considered pure by society's standards. It's a criticism hidden in apparent praise. Professor Al-Kuwari sank into his chair. In 30 years of teaching Arabic at the highest level, he had never heard a child demonstrate such sophisticated linguistic analysis. "Where did you learn this interpretation?" "From the manuscript commentaries in Sheikh Khalid's library," Isabella admitted quietly. The scholar Al-Wahidi wrote extensive notes in the margins of the original text. He believed Al-Mutanabi was secretly criticizing the very courts that patronized him. Al-Wahidi's commentaries were lost in the 13th century. The professor's voice was barely audible. "No one has seen them in 800 years. They're in a red leather book in the Sheikh's third library, the one with green carpets." The classroom erupted. Students who'd been mocking Isabella minutes earlier now stared at her with a mixture of awe and resentment. Amira's perfect posture crumpled, Layla's face flushed with shame. But Professor Al-Kuwari rose from his chair with the reverence of a man approaching something sacred. "You've read Al-Wahidi's original commentaries. A 7-year-old child has accessed texts that scholars at Oxford and Al-Azhar would commit crimes to study." He moved toward Isabella slowly, as if approaching a mirage that might vanish. "My entire dissertation at Cambridge was based on reconstructing Al-Wahidi's lost interpretations from secondary sources. You're telling me you've read the originals, that they still exist?" Isabella nodded, suddenly frightened by the intensity in the old professor's eyes. "I'm sorry if I wasn't supposed to. The books were just there, and they were so beautiful and—" "Sorry?" Professor Al-Kuwari laughed, a sound that held equal parts joy and devastation. "Child, you've just confirmed the existence of one of the greatest lost treasures in Arabic literature. Do you understand what this means? The academic implications alone." He turned to the class, his severe demeanor cracking. "Today, you've witnessed something extraordinary. This girl, this 7-year-old daughter of a cleaning woman, has demonstrated a deeper understanding of classical Arabic poetry than students 10 years older. Let that humble every one of you who arrived this morning thinking your wealth and titles guaranteed excellence." He returned to Isabella, his grey eyes now soft with something approaching tenderness. "Would Sheikh Khalid permit me to see these texts? I would consider it the greatest honor of my career." "I don't know, sir," Isabella whispered. "I'm not sure I was even supposed to read them. I just couldn't help myself." From that day forward, Isabella Santos became simultaneously the most celebrated and most resented student at the Royal Academy. Professor Al-Kuwari became her fierce protector, ensuring that in his classes at least, no one dared to mock her. But outside his classroom, the bullying intensified in quieter, more insidious ways. Invitations to birthday parties were never extended. Group projects mysteriously filled up before she could join. During lunch, if she sat at a table, the other girls would suddenly remember somewhere else they needed to be. Sheikh Khalid noticed. Of course he noticed. His intelligence network extended throughout the school, but his response surprised everyone, including himself. Rather than confront the bullies directly or use his power to force acceptance, he began appearing at the school unexpectedly during lunch periods, sitting with Isabella in the cafeteria, discussing poetry and manuscripts and philosophy, while the entire student body watched in astonishment. "Let them talk," he told Isabella one afternoon while sharing her untouched meal. "Let them think what they want. You and I know the truth, that you possess something they could never buy with all their parents' wealth. Knowledge. True, earned, fought-for knowledge. But it's so lonely," Isabella admitted, her 7-year-old resolve finally cracking. "I thought learning would bring me friends, but it's pushed everyone away. Sometimes I wish I'd never found that library. I wish I was still just invisible." Khalid set down his fork, his expression growing distant. "I was lonely too at your age. My father's expectations isolated me from other children. My tutors were hired scholars, not friends. The other boys my age couldn't relate to someone who'd read Al-Ghazali before learning to ride a bicycle. I used to hide in the stables with the horses because they didn't care about my pedigree or my failures." He met her eyes. "The loneliness of being exceptional doesn't disappear, Bella. It transforms. Eventually you find others who speak your language. Not just Arabic or Portuguese or English, but the language of deep understanding. Those connections, when they finally come, are worth the years of isolation. Have you found them? Those connections?" His pause stretched long enough that Isabella thought he wouldn't answer. "I'm still looking," he finally admitted. "But perhaps I'm also realizing that I've been searching in the wrong places. Maybe the connection I needed was sitting in my library all along, hidden in the shadow of my own arrogance." Their friendship, if that's what it was, the boundaries remained unclear, deepened over the following weeks. Khalid arranged private tutorials with Professor Al-Kuwari twice weekly, where Isabella dove deeper into classical Arabic texts, while the old scholar took meticulous notes, barely concealing his excitement at accessing materials he'd considered lost forever. Khalid himself sometimes sat in on these sessions, and Isabella noticed something curious. The great Sheikh, educated at the world's finest universities, still struggled with subtleties that came naturally to her 7-year-old mind. "How do you do it?" he asked one evening after a particularly complex discussion of verb conjugation patterns in pre-Islamic poetry. "How do you see patterns I miss, understand connections that escape me?" Isabella thought carefully before answering. "It's like the words talk to me. Not literally," she added quickly, seeing his expression. "But when I read Arabic, especially the old texts, it's not just translation in my head. The meanings appear like pictures, like memories of things I never experienced. Is that strange?" "It's impossible," Khalid said flatly, "but you do it anyway, which means my understanding of what's possible needs to expand." He pulled a leather-bound journal from his jacket, one Isabella had never seen before. "I want to show you something. My father kept a record of every question he asked me during my education, every test, every challenge, every moment he found me wanting. 47 questions over 12 years, and I failed 32 of them." He opened the journal to a page marked with a faded ribbon. "The first question, the one about Al-Murakaba, destroyed me. I was 7, just like you are now. He assembled scholars from around the world, just like I did. He expected me to already know the answer, to have discovered it independently through my studies. When I failed, he told me I'd disgraced our lineage. For weeks afterward, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I became obsessed with proving him wrong, with mastering everything, with never failing again." Isabella's small hand touched the page, tracing the elegant script that recorded a father's disappointment. "That's why you created the exact same test for those scholars? You were recreating the moment you failed, trying to conquer it, perhaps. Trying to prove that the question itself was unfair, that even brilliant adults couldn't answer it." He smiled sadly. "And then you appeared and made it look effortless. You destroyed my comfortable explanation for my childhood failure. Suddenly, I had to face the truth. I simply wasn't as clever as I thought I was. Not then, not now." "Or," Isabella said softly, with the gentle wisdom that sometimes flows from children unburdened by ego, "maybe you were clever in different ways. Maybe your father asked the wrong questions. Maybe his tests measured the wrong things." Khalid stared at her, something shifting behind his dark eyes, a crack in foundations that had been poured 30 years ago in pain and shame. "My mother used to say something similar. She died when I was 9, and I've spent 26 years trying to remember her voice. But just now, hearing you say that, I heard it again for the first time." The evening light slanted through the library windows, turning dust motes into golden stars, illuminating the two of them, the billionaire Sheikh and the cleaning woman's daughter, connected by threads neither fully understood. Outside, Mariana worried in their apartment, convinced disaster lurked around every corner. In the school's administration office, Headmistress Al-Qadi filed reports with the Ministry of Education about the extraordinary child disrupting their careful social order. In faculty lounges and palaces across the Emirates, people gossiped and speculated and made plans. But in that moment, in that library, surrounded by centuries of accumulated knowledge, Isabella Santos and Sheikh Khalid al-Mansour had found something neither expected, a mirror that showed them not who they were, but who they might become. What none of them knew, what the ancient manuscripts whispered in margins too faded to read easily, what DNA tests not yet taken would reveal, what family secrets buried beneath 3 generations of carefully maintained lies would soon expose, was that the connection between these two souls ran far deeper than shared love of poetry and language. Some destinies aren't chosen or earned, they're inherited, waiting patiently through decades and distances to finally reveal themselves when the moment comes. And the moment was coming, faster than anyone imagined, carried forward by questions that would make all the poetry and linguistics seem trivial by comparison. Questions about identity and blood and the secrets hidden in Sheikh Khalid's family tree. Secrets that, when exposed, would prove that sometimes the most impossible stories are the ones that turn out to be completely, devastatingly true. 3 months into Isabella's tenure at the Royal Academy, Sheikh Khalid received a phone call that would unravel everything. It came at 2 in the morning from Dr. Fatima al-Zahrani, the family physician who had served the Al-Mansur dynasty for 40 years, a woman so trusted that she knew secrets buried deeper than the palace foundations. Her voice trembled in a way Khalid had never heard before. "Sheikh Khalid, I need you to come to my private office immediately. Alone. Tell no one. This concerns your father, and it concerns the girl." Khalid arrived within 20 minutes, still wearing the casual clothes he'd thrown on in panic. Dr. Al-Zahrani's office occupied a discreet building away from the main hospital, a place where wealthy families handled delicate matters far from public scrutiny. The elderly physician sat behind her mahogany desk, a manila folder before her, her normally composed face ravaged by an internal struggle between duty and conscience. 31 years ago, she began without preamble, your father came to me with an unusual request. He was traveling to Brazil for business, São Paulo specifically, and wanted comprehensive medical documentation before the trip, standard procedure for international travel. But when he returned 2 months later, he requested something highly irregular, a complete blood panel with genetic markers, and he insisted I destroy all records after confirming the results. She paused, her weathered hands shaking. I kept copies anyway. Your father was many things, but transparent was never one of them. I suspected he might have. Complications abroad. Khalid's jaw tightened. What kind of complications? The kind involving a 23-year-old Brazilian medical student named Helena Santos. Doctor. Al-Zahrani opened the folder, revealing faded photographs. A young woman with caramel skin, dark curly hair, and expressive brown eyes that looked hauntingly familiar. Your father met her at a university lecture he gave on Middle Eastern economics. By all accounts, it was intense, passionate, and brief. When he left Brazil, she was 3 months pregnant. The room tilted. Khalid gripped the edge of the desk, his knuckles white. My father had an affair. He had a child, a daughter. Born in São Paulo in March 1993, your father received word of the birth, but never acknowledged paternity publicly. Instead, he arranged monthly payments through an untraceable trust, enough to ensure the child's care, but nothing extravagant. Nothing that would draw attention or create claims on the family fortune. The doctor's voice hardened with barely suppressed anger. Helena Santos died of pneumonia when the girl was only 6 years old. The payments stopped immediately. The child, Mariana Santos, disappeared into Brazil's foster system. The name hit Khalid like a physical blow. Mariana, Isabella's mother, Mariana. I didn't make the connection until you elevated them into the family wing. Then I saw the resemblance, not to Eleanor, but to your father. The shape of her eyes, the set of her jaw, so I did something unethical and probably illegal. Dr. Al-Zahrani pulled out a second folder, this one much newer. I collected DNA samples during the girl Isabella's routine school health screening. I ran comparisons against the genetic markers I kept from your father's original tests and against your own DNA from your last annual physical. She slid a laboratory report across the desk. The technical jargon meant nothing to Khalid's racing mind, but the conclusion at the bottom was written in plain, devastating language. Genetic analysis confirms subject Isabella Santos shares 5% DNA with comparison subject Khalid al-Mansur. consistent with a first cousin once removed relationship. Paternal lineage traces to common grandfather with 99.7% certainty. Isabella is my father's granddaughter, Khalid whispered. Mariana is my half-sister, the girl I've been mentoring, teaching, treating like some charity case. She's my blood, she's family, she's an Al-Mansour. More than that, Dr. Al-Zarani said quietly. According to Emirati succession law, specifically the Royal Decree of 1971 that governs your family's holdings, legitimate male heirs take precedence. But in the absence of male heirs, and you remain unmarried with no children, the estate can pass to any blood descendant of the male line if formally recognized. Your father had no other children besides you and Mariana. You have no children. That little 7-year-old girl playing in your library is potentially the only heir to the Al-Mansour fortune besides yourself. The implications crashed over Khalid in waves. His father's cruelty suddenly made a different kind of sense. A man who'd had a daughter out of wedlock, who'd abandoned her, who'd perhaps tried to mold his legitimate son into perfection to compensate for the shame of his Brazilian mistake. And then, that abandoned daughter had appeared 30 years later with a child of her own, a child so brilliant she'd answered the very question that had once destroyed Khalid himself. Does Mariana know? His voice sounded strange, distant. Does she have any idea who her father was? I don't believe so. The trust payments were anonymous. Elena Santos likely took her secrets to the grave, perhaps trying to protect her daughter from a man who'd made it clear he wanted no part of their lives. The doctor leaned forward, her expression intense. Khalid, you have a choice to make. You can keep this information buried, destroy these records, send the girl and her mother away with generous compensation, let them disappear back into obscurity. No one would ever know. Or you can acknowledge them. Formally recognize Mariana as your father's daughter, which makes Isabella your niece and a rightful member of this family. But understand, the moment you do that, everything changes. The inheritance laws activate. Your uncles and cousins will challenge it. The legal battles alone could destroy the family's reputation, and that child, that innocent 7-year-old, will become the center of a storm that could crush her. Khalid stood, pacing the small office like a caged lion, his mind churning through scenarios and consequences. He thought of Isabella's face when she'd first answered his impossible question, the terror mixed with defiant intelligence. He thought of the loneliness in her eyes at school, the way she clutched her mother's hand with desperate trust. He thought of Mariana's constant fear, the way she still flinched when he entered a room despite 3 months of kindness, the weight of generational poverty and abandonment she carried like chains. My father was a coward, he said finally, his voice cold with fury. He had a daughter and pretended she didn't exist. He let his own child grow up in poverty, let his granddaughter nearly grow up illiterate and forgotten, all because acknowledging them would be inconvenient, would damage his precious reputation. He turned to face the doctor, his decision crystallizing. I won't make the same mistake, their family, blood. That matters more than money or status or what my uncles think. You're certain. Once this is public, there's no going back. I'm certain. But even as he spoke, doubt gnawed at him. Was he doing this for Isabella and Mariana, or was he trying to fix his father's failures? Was he rescuing his family, or completing some psychological mission to prove himself better than the man who'd found him wanting? The motivations tangled, impossible to separate. Dr. Al-Zarani nodded slowly, gathering the documents. Then you'll need excellent attorneys. I recommend Hassan Khalfan. He handled your grandfather's estate. He's discreet, ruthless, and understands family law better than anyone alive. But first you need to tell them. The girl and her mother deserve to hear the truth from you before lawyers and journalists make it a circus. Khalid left the office as dawn broke over the Emirates, the sky bleeding pink and gold, beautiful and merciless. He drove back to the palace in silence, formulating and discarding a dozen opening speeches, trying to find words adequate for rewriting two lives, for explaining that the charity they'd feared was actually birthright, that the generosity they'd suspected was really just belated justice. He found Mariana in the kitchen of their apartment, preparing breakfast before Isabella woke for school. She startled when he entered. She always startled, always expected the other shoe to drop. Today, it would. "Mariana, please sit. I need to tell you something about your father." The color drained from her face. "My father. I never knew him. My mother said he was a businessman who traveled. She never told me his name before she died. His name was Ahmed al-Mansur. He was my father, which makes you my half-sister, and Isabella, my niece." He watched the words hit her like bullets, watched her body sway, caught her elbow as she stumbled. "I have proof, DNA evidence, medical records. It's not speculation, it's fact." Mariana's eyes filled with tears that spilled over immediately, her voice breaking into Portuguese as shock destroyed her English. "No é possível. You're saying Sheikh Ahmed was my father. The man who ignored my mother's letters, who never acknowledged me, who let me grow up in foster homes while he lived in a palace." Her voice rose, decades of buried pain erupting. "And you knew. All this time, you knew we were family, and you said nothing." "I found out 2 hours ago," Khalid said urgently, gripping her shoulders. "Mariana, I swear on everything I hold sacred, I had no idea until tonight. If I'd known, I would never have let you clean my floors, never let Isabella doubt her place here. You're my sister, she's my blood. That changes everything." "Changes to what? To wealthy relatives who pity us, to being the embarrassing poor relations at family gatherings?" The bitterness in her voice cut deep. "Do you know what it's like to grow up knowing your father chose not to want you, that he had all the resources in the world and decided you weren't worth even a phone call? Now you're telling me that man was your father, that I could have had a brother all along, that Bella could have had family who loved her, but instead we got nothing because we were shameful secrets." She was right. Khalid knew she was right. His father's abandonment was unforgivable, and no amount of posthumous recognition could erase that wound. But he also knew that silence now would only perpetuate the crime. "You're correct. Nothing I do can fix what my father broke. But I can acknowledge it. I can make sure Isabella knows she belongs. I can legally recognize you both, give you the Al-Mansur name if you want it, ensure you're never vulnerable or afraid again." "The Al-Mansur name," Mariana repeated hollowly. "The name of the man who destroyed my mother's life, the name of the family that could have saved us but chose not to. You think I want that? I think you deserve the choice." Khalid released her shoulders, stepping back to give her space. "Dr. Al-Zarani has documentation. You can review everything, verify the truth independently, and then you can decide, do we acknowledge this publicly, make it legal and binding? Or do I bury the evidence, send you away with enough money to live comfortably anywhere you choose, and we all pretend this conversation never happened? I will respect whatever you decide." "But Mariana," his voice cracked slightly, "I grew up as an only child, believing I was alone in carrying the weight of this family's legacy. Finding out I have a sister, that I'm not alone, that there's someone who shares this impossible heritage. I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose either of you." Mariana sank into a chair, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. 32 years of questions suddenly had answers, and those answers were more painful than the mystery had been. Behind them, neither noticed a small figure in a nightgown standing in the bedroom doorway, dark eyes wide, taking in every word. Isabella had heard everything, and in her 7-year-old mind, blessed and cursed with the ability to see patterns others missed, pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. The way Arabic felt like coming home, the instinctive understanding of texts she should not have been able to comprehend. The locked library that opened at her touch as if recognizing blood. The connection she'd felt with Sheikh Khalid from that first terrifying moment in the conference hall. She was an Al-Mansur. The gift wasn't random or miraculous. It was genetic, inherited through a line of scholars and poets and keepers of language stretching back centuries. Her grandfather had been the man whose question had started all of this, whose rejection had shaped both her mother's life and Khalid's. And now, by answering that question, she'd brought 3 generations of family trauma crashing into the present. "Mama," she whispered, and both adults turned to see her standing there, small and impossibly wise, in her cartoon character pajamas. "Mama, it's okay. I understand now why the books felt like they were mine. They were. They're our inheritance, our language, our story." She walked slowly into the kitchen, her bare feet padding on cool tile. "Sheikh Khalid, Uncle Khalid, you don't need to choose between fixing the past and doing what's right now. They're the same thing. Grandfather made a mistake, a terrible, selfish mistake. But we can be different. We can be the family he should have been." Khalid knelt before her, this child who consistently said things that shattered him. "You're not angry, not hurt." "I'm sad," Isabella admitted, her lower lip trembling. "Sad that Mama hurt for so long. Sad that Grandfather never got to meet me, never knew I could answer his questions. Sad that you grew up thinking you weren't enough when really you were just lonely for people who understood you." Tears tracked down her cheeks. "But I'm also happy, because now I have an uncle. Now Mama has a brother. Now we're not alone anymore, and neither are you." Now, the 3 of them stood in that kitchen, as the sun rose fully, light flooding through windows, illuminating a family that had been broken before it ever had a chance to form, now tentatively reaching for each other across chasms of pain and decades of lies. Outside, the world continued unchanged. But inside that apartment in the East Wing, in the space between heartbeats and decisions, the Al-Mansur family expanded to include 2 people who'd been deliberately excluded. And the ghost of Ahmed Al-Mansur finally faced judgment from the children his cowardice had damaged. The legal recognition would take months. The family battles would be brutal. The media coverage would be invasive and cruel. But in that moment, none of it mattered as much as the simple truth that had taken 30 years to surface. Mariana Santos was not a cleaning woman. She was the daughter of a dynasty. And Isabella Santos was not a charity case. She was an heiress, a legacy, a bridge between the past her grandfather had tried to erase and the future that would now be irrevocably changed by her existence. The family meeting took place 6 weeks after the DNA revelation, in the same grand conference hall where Isabella had first stunned 40 scholars with her knowledge. But this time, the audience consisted of 12 Al-Mansur relatives, Khalid's uncles, aunts and cousins, each one arriving with attorneys and expressions ranging from skepticism to barely concealed hostility. News had leaked despite Dr. Al-Zahrani's discretion, spreading through the interconnected world of Emirati elite like wildfire. A cleaning woman claiming to be Ahmed Al-Mansur's secret daughter. A child positioned as potential heir. The implications were too explosive to ignore. Khalid had spent those 6 weeks preparing meticulously. Hassan Khalfan, the family attorney, had verified every document, traced every payment from the anonymous trust, found Elena Santos's medical records from Brazil, and built an irrefutable case. Mariana had undergone additional DNA testing with independent laboratories, 3 separate facilities, all confirming the same result with mathematical certainty. Isabella had been shielded as much as possible from the growing storm, though the other children at the Royal Academy had picked up on the rumors, making her isolation even more complete. Now, as the family assembled, Mariana sat beside Khalid at the head of the massive table, her posture rigid with barely controlled terror. She wore a simple but elegant dress that Khalid had insisted on buying. Navy blue, conservative, expensive, but not ostentatious. Isabella sat on her other side, her small legs swinging beneath the chair, her face unreadable. She'd learned over these intense weeks to hide her emotions behind a mask of calm that should have been impossible for a 7-year-old. "This is ridiculous," Uncle Rashid, Ahmed's younger brother, spoke first, his jowls quivering with indignation. "A 30-year-old affair? Convenient that this claim emerges only after my brother is dead and unable to defend himself. I smell an elaborate fraud designed to access our family's wealth." Khalid's response was ice. "DNA doesn't lie, Uncle. 3 independent laboratories confirm Mariana shares 50% of her genetic material with our father. Would you like to see the reports? Or perhaps you'd prefer to submit your own DNA for comparison? The familial markers would prove the connection through you as well." Rashid's face purpled, but he fell silent. Cousin Fatima, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who managed several family businesses, leaned forward. "Even if we accept the DNA evidence, and I'm not conceding that point, what exactly are you proposing, Khalid? That we welcome this woman and her child into the family with full rights? That we accept a 7-year-old as a legitimate heir to the Al-Mansour fortune?" "I'm proposing we acknowledge reality," Khalid replied steadily. "Mariana is my father's daughter. Isabella is his granddaughter. Under both moral law and the family charter, they have rights to recognition and inheritance. Not equal to mine. I understand primogeniture and the preference for male heirs. But they deserve formal acknowledgement, suitable provision, and protection under the family name." "Protection from what?" Aunt Noor, the eldest of Ahmed's siblings, spoke with deceptive gentleness. "It seems to me this woman and child were living quite comfortable lives before they decided to pursue this claim. The girl attends our finest academy. They reside in the family estate. What more could they possibly need?" Mariana found her voice then, though it shook with suppressed rage. "What we need is what was stolen from us. My mother loved your brother. She believed his promises. When I was born, she sent him letters, dozens of them, with photographs, with updates, with pleas for even minimal acknowledgement. Not for money, for relationship, for my father to know his daughter existed." Her Portuguese accent thickened with emotion. "He ignored every letter. When my mother died, I was 6 years old. The anonymous payments that had barely covered rent and food stopped immediately. I spent my childhood in foster homes, sometimes with families who cared, often with families who saw me as a paycheck from the state. I worked from age 14 cleaning houses, ironic, isn't it, to send myself through school. I had my daughter at 23, alone, terrified, with no family and no support. And all the while your brother lived in a palace, surrounded by wealth that could have changed everything for us, and he chose silence. The room absorbed this testimonial in uncomfortable quiet. Several relatives shifted in their seats, avoiding eye contact. But Uncle Rashid rallied. "So this is about money after all. A sob story designed to guilt us into sharing the family fortune with outsiders. We are not outsiders." Isabella's clear voice cut through the tension like a bell. Every head turned to the child, who'd remained silent until now. "Excuse me for speaking without permission, but I have something to say." She slid off her chair, standing at her full 4-foot height, and addressed the assembled relatives with remarkable composure. "You can reject us if you choose. You can question the DNA tests and hire your own lawyers and fight this in court for years. But you cannot call us outsiders. I carry the same blood as Uncle Khalid. I have the same gift for language that ran through your family for generations. When I read the manuscripts in the library, the ones written by your ancestors, I understand them not because I'm clever, but because I'm connected to them. They speak to me because I'm supposed to hear them." Cousin Tariq, who'd been silent throughout, leaned back with a calculating expression. "The girl makes an interesting point. The linguistic abilities are unusual, almost as if they're inherited rather than learned." He turned to Khalid. "Have you had her tested? Formally assessed by professionals?" "Professor Al-Kawari from the Royal Academy has documented her abilities extensively," Khalid confirmed. "She reads classical Arabic at a university level, understands contextual nuances that postdoctoral students miss, and demonstrates intuitive comprehension of texts she's never formally studied. Her IQ tests place her in the 99th percentile for verbal reasoning, but more than that." He placed a protective hand on Isabella's shoulder. "She has the soul of a scholar. She loves learning for its own sake, not for status or grades. She's exactly what our family has always claimed to value." Pretty words," Aunt Noor said, her gentleness now clearly a veneer over steel. "But the heart of this matter is inheritance law. Khalid, you're 35 and unmarried. You have no children. Under current circumstances, the estate would be divided among your father's siblings and their descendants upon your death. Now you want to insert this child into that line of succession, to give her potential claims that would diminish every other family member's share." "I want to correct an injustice," Khalid said firmly. "My father wronged Mariana and Elena before her. That wrong created ripples that damaged Isabella as well. I have the power and authority as head of this family to acknowledge them formally. The only question is whether the rest of you will support that decision or force us into legal battles that will damage everyone involved." The threats hung in the air, implicit but clear. Khalid controlled the majority voting shares in the family businesses, managed the investment portfolios, held the deeds to most properties. He could make life very difficult for relatives who depended on family wealth for their lifestyles. But family fractures, once opened, never fully healed. Whatever happened in this room would echo through generations. Uncle Rashid stood abruptly. "I will not support this charade. Ahmed was my brother, and I will not see his memory tarnished by a woman who conveniently appears with claims after his death. I'm prepared to challenge this in court, to demand our own DNA verification, to investigate every aspect of this story until—" "Sit down, Rashid." Aunt Noor's command stopped him mid-rant. She turned to Mariana with eyes that missed nothing. "You're asking for recognition, provision, and protection. Specifically, what does that mean? Numbers, terms, conditions?" Mariana glanced at Khalid, who nodded encouragement. She'd rehearsed this moment with Hassan Khalfan, but the reality of facing these powerful relatives made her voice falter initially before strengthening. "I want Isabella's position as Ahmed al-Mansur's granddaughter legally documented. I want her full name to be Isabella al-Mansur Santos, hyphenated to honor both her heritages. I want a trust established for her education and future, not as charity but as birthright, equivalent to what other grandchildren in this family receive. I want her protected from disinheritance or legal challenges based on the circumstances of her birth." "And for yourself," Fatima asked shrewdly. "Formal acknowledgement as Ahmed's daughter, legal protection under family privacy laws. Nothing more." Mariana's voice was steady now. "I don't want his money for myself. I've lived without it for 32 years. I can continue. But I want my daughter to have what should have been hers from birth. A family, a heritage, a place in the world that doesn't depend on anyone's charity or goodwill." The relatives conferred in whispered clusters, attorneys leaning in with advice, tensions visible in rigid postures and sharp glances. Isabella watched it all with those two wise eyes, memorizing faces, cataloguing reactions, storing away information about which relatives might become allies and which would remain enemies. Even at 7, she understood that family politics were a chess game measured in years, not moves. Finally, Aunt Noor spoke again, clearly the power broker among the siblings. "Here is my proposal, and it's non-negotiable. We acknowledge Mariana as Ahmed's daughter, privately within family records, with legal protections against her being exploited by media or outsiders. Isabella receives formal recognition as his granddaughter, with the hyphenated name she requested. A trust is established, $10 million, accessible at age 21, with provisions for education and health before that time. In exchange, both Mariana and Isabella signed documents waiving any future claims against the primary estate, agreeing that Khalid's children, if and when he has them, take precedence in all matters of inheritance." 10 million? Uncle Rashid sputtered. "That's absurd that's less than any other grandchild in this family receives." Aunt Noor cut him off coldly. "It's actually quite conservative, Rashid, though I suspect you're too busy being offended to recognize that. The girl is 7. By the time she's 21, 10 million will be worth less, and education alone will consume a significant portion. It's fair without being excessive." She turned back to Mariana. "Do you accept?" Mariana looked at Khalid, searching his face for guidance. He gave the slightest nod. Hassan Khalfan, sitting silently as an observer until now, also nodded approvingly. The terms were actually better than they'd hoped. Acknowledgement and protection were the primary goals, and the financial provision was generous, even if less than ideal. "I accept," Mariana said quietly, "with one addition. I want it documented that this agreement was reached voluntarily by all parties, that no one coerced or manipulated anyone, and that the Al-Mansur family formally acknowledges wrongdoing in how Ahmed Al-Mansur handled his relationship with Elena Santos and his daughter Mariana. Not an apology, he's dead. Apologies mean nothing now. But acknowledgement that harm was done, and this agreement represents partial restitution." The relatives bristled at the word wrongdoing, but Aunt Noor surprisingly smiled, a thin, sharp expression that held grudging respect. "You negotiate better than expected. Very well. The acknowledgement of wrongdoing will be included in the private family records, though not in public documents." "Agreed." "Agreed." The formal signing took another 2 hours, documents reviewed by multiple attorneys, language debated, clauses refined. Isabella sat through it all, her legs numb from sitting still, her mind drifting between the boring adult conversations and imagined futures. She tried to picture herself at 21, tried to imagine what kind of person she'd become, what she'd do with $10 million and a hyphenated last name that connected her to both her Brazilian mother and her Emirati grandfather. As the meeting finally concluded and relatives began filtering out, some with tight smiles and forced congratulations, others with barely concealed resentment, Cousin Tariq approached Mariana and Isabella. He was younger than the others, maybe 40, with a thoughtful face and less obvious hostility. "I wanted to say," he began quietly, "that I believe you, both of you. I was in my 20s when Uncle Ahmed made that trip to Brazil. He came back different, distant, troubled. I always wondered what happened there. Now I know." He crouched to Isabella's level. "Your gift with languages is real. I watched you correct Professor Al-Kuwari's translation in the documents we reviewed today. That subjunctive conjugation he missed. You're not pretending. You're genuinely one of us. Welcome to the family, little cousin. I'm sorry it took so long." His kindness, unexpected and unearned, broke something in Isabella's careful composure. Tears she'd been holding back for 6 weeks finally spilled over, and Mariana pulled her daughter close, her own face wet. Khalid stood behind them, his hand on Mariana's shoulder, and in that moment they formed a united front, three people who'd been separately damaged by Ahmed al-Mansour's choices, now bound together by blood and by the shared experience of fighting for recognition. The battle wasn't over. Uncle Rashid would make trouble, that much was certain. Media would eventually find the story. Scandals this delicious never stayed buried forever. Isabella would face renewed bullying at school once her Al-Mansur lineage became common knowledge. Mariana would struggle with the psychological weight of being acknowledged by people who clearly resented her existence. Khalid would face criticism for his decisions, questions about his judgment, whispers about his motivations. But as they left the conference hall together, stepping into afternoon sunshine that turned the palace grounds golden, one truth had been established beyond challenge or denial. Isabella Al-Mansur Santos was an heir to one of the world's great fortunes, a daughter of two continents, a bridge between cultures, and the keeper of a gift that had been passed through her blood from scholars dead 1,000 years. The girl who'd once hidden in shadows while her mother cleaned had emerged into the light, and nothing, not prejudice, not legal battles, not family politics, could push her back into invisibility again. The real journey, she thought with the strange prescience that sometimes seized her, was only beginning. Being acknowledged was one thing. Earning the right to belong, proving that she deserved her place not just by DNA, but by who she chose to become, would be the work of years. But she was 7 years old, brilliant beyond her age, and possessed of a stubbornness inherited from both her Brazilian and Emirati lineages. If anyone could bridge two worlds and forge them into something new, it would be her. 5 years later, Isabella Al-Mansur Santos stood before a different audience in a different conference hall, this time at Oxford University, where she'd been invited as the youngest participant in an international symposium on classical Arabic literature. At 12 years old, she'd published 2 papers on previously unknown variations in pre-Islamic poetry, delivered lectures to graduate students, and helped Sheikh Khalid, Uncle Khalid, catalogue and digitize his family's manuscript collection, making centuries of lost knowledge available to scholars worldwide. But success hadn't come without scars. The intervening years had been brutal in ways that money and family recognition couldn't fix. When the story of her heritage broke publicly, as they'd known it would, the media coverage was savage. Headlines screamed about secret heirs and gold-digging cleaners. Tabloids printed side-by-side photos of Mariana in her old cleaning uniform next to pictures of the palace, creating narratives of deception and social climbing that bore no resemblance to truth. Isabella's classmates, already resentful, became openly cruel. Someone spray-painted fake princess on her locker. Anonymous social media accounts mocked her appearance, her accent, her background. For months, security found threatening letters in the family's mail. The worst came when she was 9. Uncle Rashid, who'd never accepted the family agreement, funded a documentary claiming to expose the truth about the Al-Mansur DNA scandal. It painted Mariana as a con artist who'd somehow manipulated test results, suggested Isabella was coached to perform at the conference, implied that Khalid had been seduced or blackmailed into supporting them. The documentary aired on an international streaming platform, and overnight, Isabella went from young prodigy to subject of conspiracy theories and public ridicule. She'd stopped eating for 2 weeks, her 12-year-old body becoming dangerously thin. Mariana found her one night, collapsed in the bathroom, hyperventilating through a panic attack. "I can't do this, Mama," she'd sobbed. "They're right. I don't belong. We should never have accepted the recognition. We should have stayed invisible." It was Khalid who'd pulled her back from that edge. He'd taken her to the locked library, the 5th treasury where this all began, and shown her something he'd discovered while cataloguing, a leather-bound journal belonging to his great-grandfather, dated 1889, written in archaic Arabic, that only Isabella could fully translate. "Read this passage," he told her, pointing to a specific page. Isabella had read aloud, her voice steadying as the ancient words focused her scattered mind. "My daughter Fatima possesses a gift for languages that surpasses my own, though society forbids her from pursuing formal scholarship. She translates Persian texts in secret, writes poetry under a male pseudonym, debates theology with scholars who believe her to be a male student via written correspondence. The injustice of this, that her gender prevents the world from benefiting from her brilliance, weighs heavily. Yet she continues because the knowledge itself brings her joy, regardless of recognition. She reminds me that greatness is not determined by public acclaim, but by the depth of one's contribution to human understanding. Perhaps future generations will be kinder to women of intellect. I pray they will." Khalid had closed the book gently. "Your great-great-great-aunt Fatima. She died before her 30th birthday, never publicly acknowledged for her scholarship. But her translations were used by universities across the Middle East, attributed to the male pseudonym she created. She shaped academic discourse for decades without anyone knowing her real name." He'd met Isabella's eyes with fierce intensity. "You think you don't belong. You belong more than most people born into privilege. You earned your place through ability and courage. The documentary, the cruel classmates, the public ridicule. None of that changes the truth of who you are and what you can do. You're standing on the shoulders of women like Fatima, who never got to stand in the light. Don't let ignorant people push you back into shadows that your ancestors fought to escape." The memory of that moment sustained Isabella now as she stepped onto the Oxford stage, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes assessing her 12-year-old frame, her brown skin that marked her as other in these historically white academic spaces, her youth that made many in the audience inherently skeptical of her credibility. She wore a simple navy dress, echoing the one her mother had worn 5 years ago in that first family meeting, and carried a leather portfolio that contained her presentation notes in 3 languages. "Good evening," she began in flawless English, her voice steady and clear. "My name is Isabella Al-Mansour Santos. I'm 12 years old, and I'm here to discuss the lost manuscripts of Al-Wahidi and how they fundamentally change our understanding of classical Arabic poetry. But before I begin the academic portion of my talk, I want to acknowledge something uncomfortable. Some of you didn't want me here. You signed petitions, sent letters to the organizing committee, questioned my qualifications. You believe I'm a publicity stunt, a child prodigy manufactured for media attention, or worse, a fraud elevated by family connections rather than genuine ability. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Several professors exchanged glances. But Isabella continued, her tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. "I understand your skepticism. Academic credentials usually require decades of study. I have 12 years of life experience. But I'd like to suggest that sometimes the barriers we construct around knowledge, the rules about who's qualified to contribute, serve more to protect institutional hierarchies than to advance understanding. So I'm going to prove, in the next 45 minutes, that my age and unconventional background don't diminish the validity of my research. And then you can decide whether your skepticism was justified or whether it revealed your own limitations." The audacity of this statement, a 12-year-old lecturing Oxford professors about their limitations, should have generated outrage. Instead, something electric filled the hall. Isabella had captured their attention completely, challenged them in a way that demanded response. Now she had to deliver. She did. For the next 45 minutes, Isabella presented research that synthesized years of work with the manuscripts Khalid had made accessible. She revealed linguistic patterns in al-Wahidi's commentary that suggested influence from Persian poetry, thought to have developed later. She demonstrated connections between supposedly unrelated poetic traditions. She proposed new interpretations of contested passages that had baffled scholars for centuries, backing each claim with meticulous evidence and textual analysis. But more than the content, it was her presentation style that captivated. She spoke with passion, tempered by precision, explaining complex concepts with clarity that made them accessible without dumbing them down. She quoted extensively from memory in both classical Arabic and English translation. She fielded interrupting questions from audience members with grace, even when those questions were clearly designed to trip her up or expose weaknesses. When a professor from Cambridge challenged her interpretation of a particular verb form, she acknowledged his point, refined her argument in real time, and then demonstrated how her revised interpretation actually strengthened her overall thesis. By the time she concluded, the audience was standing. The applause started slowly, almost reluctantly, then built into genuine enthusiasm. Professor Miriam Chen from Stanford, a scholar Isabella had admired for years, approached the stage with tears in her eyes. "That was extraordinary," she said simply. "In 30 years of studying Arabic literature, I've never heard such a comprehensive synthesis of historical and linguistic analysis from someone at any age. You've just revolutionized my understanding of 9th century poetic development. Where do you go from here? What's your next research project?" Isabella smiled, the expression transforming her serious face into something that looked finally like the child she still was. "I'm 12, Professor Chen. I have years before I need to plan a career trajectory. Right now, I'm going home to spend time with my mother and uncle, probably eat too much ice cream, and maybe play video games for a few hours before starting my next paper. I'm trying to remember that being exceptional doesn't mean sacrificing being human." The answer, delivered with gentle humor and self-awareness, generated affectionate laughter. As the crowd dispersed, professors collecting her contact information, graduate students asking for reading recommendations, journalists seeking interviews, Isabella found herself surrounded by the kind of intellectual community she'd always craved. These weren't people impressed by her family name or her wealth. They respected her mind, her contributions, her ideas. But the person whose opinion mattered most stood in the back of the hall. Mariana, now 37, her face radiant with pride and relief. Next to her stood Khalid, 40 years old now, his dark hair showing the first threads of silver at the temples, his expression one of fierce satisfaction. They'd flown to Oxford together, this makeshift family forged from scandal and DNA tests and shared love of learning. They'd supported Isabella through the darkest moments and celebrated her triumphs, and they'd done it as family, imperfect, unconventional, but real. That evening, in their hotel suite overlooking Oxford's dreaming spires, the three of them shared pizza, Isabella's favorite comfort food, which always made Khalid shake his head in amused horror, and reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "Do you remember," Mariana asked her daughter softly, "when you were 7 and we lived in that tiny apartment and I was terrified every day that we'd be sent away?" "I remember," Isabella said. "I remember being scared all the time, scared of being invisible, scared of being noticed, scared that my gift made me weird or wrong." She took another bite of pizza, chewing thoughtfully. "Sometimes I still feel that way, but now I also feel like I'm building something. Like all the hard stuff, the bullying, the documentary, the panic attacks, they're not destroying me. They're teaching me how to stand in spaces that weren't designed for people like me." Khalid raised his soda can in a toast. To standing in spaces, to refusing to be invisible, to rewriting stories that others thought were finished. They clinked their drinks together, soda for Isabella, wine for the adults. And in that simple moment, 5 years of struggle and transformation crystallized into something approaching peace. Isabella was still too young for Oxford enrollment, still navigating the complicated reality of being a teenage prodigy from a controversial background. Mariana still sometimes woke from nightmares about losing everything, still struggled with imposter syndrome despite years of therapy. Khalid still fought battles with relatives who resented the changes Isabella and Mariana had brought to the family, still questioned whether he was supporting his niece properly or unconsciously trying to fix his own complicated relationship with his dead father. But they had each other. They had proof, irrefutable public academic proof, that Isabella's gifts were real and valuable. They had a family name that, for all its complications, provided protection and resources and belonging. Most importantly, they had a future that was no longer constrained by poverty or invisibility, or other people's definitions of where they belonged. 2 years later, at 14, Isabella would become the youngest person ever admitted to Oxford's graduate program in Middle Eastern Studies. At 16, she'd publish her first book, a comprehensive analysis of gender in classical Arabic poetry that became required reading in universities worldwide. At 18, she'd establish a foundation providing scholarships for children from low-income backgrounds who showed aptitude in languages and literature, ensuring that other brilliant kids hiding in libraries or cleaning their parents' workplaces had opportunities she'd nearly missed. But those triumphs were still ahead, mysteries yet to unfold. That night in Oxford, Isabella Almanzor Santos was simply a 12-year-old who'd delivered a killer academic presentation, eaten too much pizza, and fallen asleep on the hotel couch while her mother covered her with a blanket and her uncle read quietly in a nearby chair. She dreamed of manuscripts and poetry, of her Brazilian grandmother she'd never met and her Emirati grandfather, whose rejection had set everything in motion, of languages that connected past and present and future into a single golden thread of understanding. She dreamed, most vividly, of standing in that locked library at 7 years old, opening books that called to her blood, discovering that knowledge had no borders and brilliance could bloom anywhere. Even in the heart of a child the world had tried very hard to ignore. The locked door that opened at her touch hadn't been magic or miracle. It had been recognition, one legacy acknowledging another, one generation of scholars welcoming the next, one story ending so a better one could finally begin. And in the years to come, when people asked Isabella how she'd accomplished so much so young, how she'd overcome poverty and prejudice and scandal to become one of the world's leading authorities on classical Arabic literature, she would always give the same answer. I had a mother who never stopped believing I mattered, an uncle who chose justice over comfort, and ancestors who left knowledge in locked rooms for someone brave enough to open the doors. The rest was just hard work and refusing to disappear. The billionaire Sheikh's impossible question had been answered not once, but twice. First by a 7-year-old in a conference hall, proving that genius recognizes no social boundaries. Second by that same child 5 years later on an Oxford stage, proving that recognition and resources could transform potential into achievement. But the most important question, whether a family could heal from generations of damage, whether abandoned children could find belonging, whether love could overcome the failures of the past, that question was answered in the quiet moments between triumphs. In braiding hair before school, in shared pizza and soda toasts. In a locked library that opened for a child who carried the blood of scholars and the soul of a survivor. The answer, it turned out, was yes. Always yes. For those brave enough to open the door.